I started the Simple Garden 6 years ago to explore ways to grow food that took less time, as well as getting away from the more complicated planting plans and successional cropping that I was trying to do in the other family scale gardens. And I wanted to have a garden that didn't involve frequent harvesting and care throughout the year. And it has become one of the most productive gardens as measured by the amount of food that we were able to harvest compared to the amount of time that we need to put in. And it's also one of the more productive growing spaces that we have in terms of the amount of explorations and learning and the number of videos that are based in this garden, which I find interesting. There is something about the focus of ideas, the simplification of what I need to keep track of, and the simple repeated cycles that I can observe over time that have been very useful for learning. And this simple garden has enough space for each crop to be able to do larger variety trials, which makes things a lot more interesting. And all of this allows me to get a lot more food, experience, and learning out of a lot less work. There is a really simple layout to this garden and a fairly basic process for managing it, which makes it different from the other gardens. And this simplicity and consistency has provided a lot of opportunities for learning. I have followed the same basic 3-year crop rotation for 6 seasons, starting with squash, followed by potatoes, which are then followed by carrots and onions, before returning to squash again. The sheet composting is integrated into the squash rotation as the main way of providing fertility for all these crops, which is quite different from the fertility and soil management of all the other gardens. The soil is only dug in the section before the potatoes and while harvesting, which prepares the soil for the more delicate onions and carrots that follow in the rotation, which is a form of multi-season integration that I don't often use. The ground cover fabric that we use to help start the garden is still being used to cover the sheet composting and to cover the whole garden in the winter to reduce weeding and time preparing beds. Having only 4 crops to focus on has been useful, especially as each of them can be problematic to grow for various reasons. And having a large enough batch of each crop helps to spot more localized issues. But having such a large crop increases the loss when pests or diseases become an issue for the whole crop. The consistent crop rotation over 6 seasons has made it easier to spot trends over the years and have a better sense of the impact of the variable weather that we get each year. This is also the only garden that we grow main crop potatoes in, and we grow 4 varieties each year to give us a more diverse selection of potatoes for use in the kitchen, as well as being able to test the differences between the varieties. And there was more than enough space to do large variety trials for both the carrot and onion crops this past year, something that I want to repeat for at least another year. There was even enough space to grow a wider variety of squash, although we only grew 2 varieties in this garden this past year. So this garden stands out from the other growing spaces quite a bit, but it's also simple enough to be more successful, but any issues that do arise can have a bigger impact. Beyond the simplicity of the crop rotation, it is the sheet composting covered with ground cover fabric that I probably find most interesting and useful in this garden. The squash plants seem to really benefit from having their roots growing under and up through the decomposing organic matter, and the vines and squash fruit have no problem growing over the surface of the ground cover fabric. I don't need to worry about weeds becoming established among the vines, and this part of the garden is ready to overwinter once the squash are harvested. This sheet composting is the fertility engine for the whole garden, providing all of the organic matter and most of the fertility for the squash plants, as well as for the potatoes, carrots, and onions in the following 2 seasons. And it has also become a really useful feature in the wider landscape that we manage, in ways that I didn't really expect. It is a place where we put so much of the rough and problematic grasses, weeds, and other organic matter that we collect when clearing the surrounding landscape. This type of rough material can be problematic to add to the usual compost piles unless it is chopped up first, and we usually end up with large amounts of it at one time, which would ideally be layered in with other material in the compost. But with such a large area for the sheet composting, this bulk material can simply be spread out over whatever is already there and left to decompose without any more effort or processing. In the spring, I've started to collect nettles from a few of the large patches in the area and to cut back the comfrey plants to add to the sheet compost, and then to top it off with layers of grass clippings from the first few cuttings of the grass surrounding the gardens. This fresh spring growth would contain a lot of nitrogen, which would generally be quite low in the higher carbon material that we collect during the autumn and winter. And of course, all of the carrot tops, damaged potatoes, and other crop wastes from this garden get added to the sheet compost, though I often forget and haul this stuff up to the main compost that I use for the other gardens. After 6 years, this sheet mulching method is working reasonably well, and I have not noticed any serious issues, but the ground cover fabric that covers it all prevents the damaged potatoes and weed roots regrowing and causing problems. I haven't noticed any issues with additional weeds from the seeds that might be in the grasses that we bring in, but most of this material is collected in the late autumn or the winter when a lot of the seeds would have fallen off, or in the spring or early summer before the next batch of seeds has a chance to mature. And it is very useful to have a convenient place to put any material like this, from when the onions are harvested in August or September until the squash plants start to really grow in the following May or June. So there is generally only about 3 months of the year when it is not so convenient to use this spot as a place to put all the surplus and bulk organic matter. But at that time of the year, it is often mainly grass clippings. This sheet composting is easy enough if you don't count the amount of work required to collect all the material, but most of that work is going to be done anyway. And although the plants are all growing reasonably well, I'm beginning to realize that there probably isn't enough fertility left after the squash to feed the hungry potato plants the following season. I have learned from the potato grow bag trials that extra fertility during the growing season can really help to boost the yield of the potato plants. I have been adding some chicken manure pellets to the furrows when planting the seed potatoes in this garden to add additional fertility, but this has only been the equivalent of about 6 grams of nitrogen per square meter, which I don't think is enough for the plants. We ended up with a lot of small potatoes last year, which I think is a good indication that they didn't have enough fertility to continue to grow during the later part of the season. I think one of the issues is that the sheet composting method hasn't been building up the same levels of soil organic matter that the other gardens get with loads of imported compost. So there is possibly less in reserve for the plants. I could add even more of the high nitrogen organic material to the sheet composting each year, and any that isn't used by the squash plants would be left over for the potatoes the following year, assuming that it isn't washed down into the subsoil below by the heavy winter rains. I could also add more concentrated fertility at several times during the growing season, and the easiest option would be to simply throw some more chicken manure pellets into the established potato bed. But I want to explore using more undecomposed organic matter in this garden, and I now realize that the best option might be to use fresh grass clippings at the base of the potato plants, as this mulch would also help to keep the sun off of the developing tubers so that they don't turn green. We already do the work of earthing up these potato plants with soil, so doing at least part of the task with freely available material that I need to put somewhere, which could also boost the fertility at the same time, makes a lot of sense to me. It might be a bit tricky with timing to be able to add enough layers of fresh grass clippings to be able to build up a deep enough mulch that will last the full season before the potato plants get too big. But as the grass clippings decompose, it will release an additional supply of nitrogen for the large plants, which should boost the yields, and hopefully there will be enough nitrogen left in the soil for the onion and carrot crop the following year. Managing the fertility of this garden is easy enough, especially if I don't count the time that I spend collecting all of the organic matter, which is generally work that I would do anyway. I could collect a lot more of the fresh growth of nettles, comfrey, and other plants in the spring and early summer, which would bring a lot more fertility and trace elements to the garden. That would take additional time and effort, but I think the increased productivity and health of the plants could be worth it, and it would take a lot less time than it takes to manage in turn the compost piles. There seems to be significant benefits of growing the squash plants with sheet composting, because the plants in this garden consistently seem to do better than the same plants in the other gardens. The ground cover fabric definitely helps to make the garden easier to manage, helping the sheet compost to fully decompose, preventing weeds from becoming an issue, and protecting the soil over the winter. I think it's possible to manage a garden like this without using these plastic coverings. And I would be interested to explore using green manures to cover the soil over the winter instead, especially after the squash is harvested and before the potato rotation the following year. As we already dig this section of the garden before planting the potatoes, we could also be incorporating any green manure, but there might be an issue getting the seed to germinate that late in the autumn. Sowing a green manure in late spring or early autumn after the onions are harvested would be much more successful, but I would then be giving up this space to put all the rough organic material that we collect in the autumn and winter. So I think for now I will stick with using this fabric to cover the garden over the winter. But in another context, I think it would be really interesting to explore the use of green manures as a soil and fertility building component of a simple crop rotation like this. The overall yield from this simple garden was highest in 2022, with over 600 kilograms of food harvested, compared to approximately 500 kilograms from previous seasons. This translates to about 6 kilograms per square meter, which is a decent overall yield. And with only 32 hours of work, this means that there is about 19 kilograms of vegetables harvested for every hour worked throughout the year, which is great and much higher than any of the other gardens. This garden is definitely an efficient way to get a lot of staple vegetables for eating from the autumn through the winter and into the spring. But of course, we didn't get any of the higher value summer crops out of this garden. We could have been more efficient with our time, and as always, the yields could have been higher. We didn't weigh any of the green or damaged potatoes, and the yields from these plants could definitely have been higher with more fertility, and mulching with grass clippings should help with both of these. The carrots produced close to the best yield in the 6 years, and with a range of different varieties, some did a lot better than others. There is still some issues with forking, but the damage by carrot fly larvae is still the big problem, and I need to make sure that the netting is in place right after sowing next year. We planted half of the large squash crop with the usual Crown Prince hybrid variety, and grew 4 plants of the delicata variety, the seeds of which had unfortunately been cross-pollinated. There was still a reasonable yield, but one plant produced a lot less than the others, and the fruit of another plant was not edible. The onion crop had the biggest improvement, and we didn't have any issues with mildew, which really affected the crops a few years ago. The biggest change this year was growing from seed instead of onion sets, and this was much more successful than I thought it would be, and most of the 15 varieties did better from seed than I would have expected from sets. So with the squash and potato yields fairly stable from year to year, it was the much better crops of carrots and onions that made 2022 the best harvest from this simple garden, and I wonder if the upward trend will be able to continue. I think there is a real benefit in letting this experiment run for another couple of years with only minor changes, unlike in the other gardens where I'm going to be making significant changes to the planting plans again this year. I want to explore a few other varieties of potatoes to find ones that produce well and that we really like to eat. I'm planning to grow 4 varieties of squash, which will probably reduce the yield a bit because the Crown Prince hybrid that we've been relying on seems to be one of the most productive varieties we can grow in this climate. We will continue with the onion and carrot variety trials for at least another season, and we will need to put in the work to get the carrot fly under control. But the biggest change that I want to make is to use grass clippings to mulch the potato plants, to help to move away from the using chicken manure pellets or some other form of concentrated amendments to boost the fertility for the plants. I like the idea of managing the fertility of this garden entirely with biomass collected from the surrounding landscape, which really differentiates it from the other gardens, which all rely on our own compost, imported municipal compost, and a range of different concentrated amendments that I buy in. So we will be continuing with essentially the same garden for a 7th year with minor refinements and closer observations. And I think that it is a sign of a successful garden that I don't feel the need to change so much. It just seems to work, which is great. And I find it interesting that we get so much out of this garden, both in terms of food and in terms of explorations and learning. It is the easiest garden to summarize or to talk about as an integrated system or design, whereas the other gardens have so many more crops and a much more complicated planting plan, which we don't always complete. The stability and reliability of this simple garden is a nice anchor within this Red Gardens project, and it continues to provide us with lots to eat as well as lots to learn and explore and a few videos, despite its simplicity, or perhaps because of it.